This is the Charles Island Sandbar, also known as a tombolo, located here at Silver Sands State Park in Milford, Connecticut. While the tombolo has some real history, it also has some real dangers.
According to state geologist Margaret Thomas, a tombolo is different from a sandbar. A sandbar is a coastal landform created by deposits of sand, by currents, or along the shoreline by waves and tides. A tombolo, on the other hand, is a sand or gravel bar that connects an island to the mainland or to another island. The Silver Sands tombolo, according to Thomas, is 17,500 years old. It leads to Charles Island, a 14-acre island about a half-mile off Milford's coast. Today it is a bird sanctuary owned by the state, but it's had many roles over the years.
Back in the 1600s, a man named Charles Beale bought the island, and he was going to put a tobacco plantation out there, and that didn't work. And then I don't think much was done at all with the island in the 1700s, but in the early 1800s, a man named Harris bought it and built an estate out there. He had a mansion out there, and that didn't last. It was converted into a hotel called the Island House, and then various other names, and that never succeeded. There was even a steamboat pier out there where people would be brought from New Haven by boat, but I guess it was a little bit too hard to get to the island, and the hotel never succeeded. Well, after the Island House failed, and I've got a picture of it if you want, there was a fertilizer factory out there. They were going to make fish oil out of menhaden, which is a kind of fish, and also various kinds of fish fertilizer. And when there was an onshore wind, it stank terribly, and the people of Milford hated it, and that eventually failed. And then in the early 20th century, the Dominican brothers from St. Mary's in New Haven built a retreat out there. And that's how Michael Dooling, who wrote the book about it, in fact there's a picture here of it. They had a chapel out there and everything else. And they lasted out there up into the 1930s, and just about the time that they left, the place was destroyed by the 1938 hurricane. And it's interesting, Sheriff Slavin was going to put his boys' village out there on the island, and then the place got destroyed by the hurricane, so he put it up in Wheeler's Farms instead. And then, let's see, United Illuminating bought the island, and they were going to put a nuclear power plant out there. Unfortunately, that never happened, and now the state of Connecticut has it, and it's a sanctuary, so a wildlife sanctuary, so I guess maybe that's going to work.
Perhaps the most interesting bit of history concerns the legendary pirate Captain Kidd. According to a number of historical accounts, including this book, A Historical Account of Charles Island by Michael Dooling, Charles Island is one of the places that Kidd was believed to have buried treasure while on his final voyage that started in India and ended in Boston. Dooling writes, "Over the centuries, many people have dug around the island in an attempt to find the treasure." Also, according to Dooling and other sources, there's a local legend first published in 1838 saying several people went to the island to dig for treasure, found a box, and then were greeted by a headless ghost that chased them away. While that is probably just legend, Milford history does suggest that Captain Kidd indeed visited Milford several times. According to History of Milford, Connecticut, When Captain Kidd the pirate cruised up Long Island Sound in 1699, according to legend, he put in at Milford at about 7 o'clock one evening, strode up the street, and boldly kissed a young lady. Former city historian Richard Platt, however, cautions that this may be a case of fake news. But Platt acknowledged that it is believed Captain Kidd stopped in Milford several times. The story of Captain Kidd, and whether or not he buried treasure on Charles Island, has become part of Milford history and its identity. Today there is an annual pirate festival where people dress like pirates and where a Captain Kidd look-alike is ferried through Milford Harbor on a boat, landing at the town dock to start the festivities. Several local children's authors have written fictional stories about Captain Kidd and Charles Island, keeping the legends alive.
Perhaps because of the history, or because this is one of the only few pieces of land connected to a shore by a tombolo, many people walk across it when the tide is low to get to the island. And that is where the danger comes in because of the sandbar. It is not always bare. The tide comes in and covers it and brings a strong undertow.
Last year, a 28-year-old man walking on the tombolo was swept into the water by the rising tide. Rescuers searched, but to no avail. 2 days later, the man's body was found washed up on Charles Island. Here, rescuers somberly transport the body to shore. This isn't the first time. Over the years, a number of people have been swept from the sandbar. Tragedies reportedly go back years. In this book, Connecticut's Seaside Ghosts by Donald Carter, Carter calls the area between the island and the mainland a deadly channel and recounts several deaths, including that of 2 boys who were swept from the sandbar in 1939 as they tried to cross it. In recent years, deadly and near-deadly mishaps have taken place on the sandbar. In July of 2017, it was George Swaby, a 28-year-old man walking on the sandbar with a friend, who was swept into the Sound and drowned. The year before, tragedy was nearly averted when Milford firefighters rescued 2 adults and 8 children after the group ran into trouble when they were crossing on the sandbar. The group had walked out to Charles Island, but misjudged the tide and became overcome with sweeping waters while attempting their return to shore. The September before, the Milford Fire Department rescued 2 people from the waters off the beach after they were swept off the sandbar. Fire officials were on the scene, actually training for that exact situation when the people needed help. In July of 2015, Milford firefighters rescued 3 people from nearly drowning there. The 3 people, ages 23, 20, and 17, were making their way to the island, unaware that the tide was coming in. In 2011, a 34-year-old Hamden man, Rocco Daddio Jr., was swept from the sandbar and drowned. The incoming tide knocked him into the water, and the strong current and undertow carried him to his death. His 9-year-old son was rescued. His widow later asked that the sandbar be closed to people. In the month preceding that, there were several rescues on the sandbar when people were caught by the tide.
Okay, so years ago, my friends and I were walking to Charles Island. It was a beautiful day, nice and warm. And we noticed probably 200 feet in front of us that maybe an entire family of people were being swept away. There's probably 2 people, probably 50 feet off the sandbar, and just beyond that, maybe another 50 people were 50 feet were 2 or 3 more people floating. So we called for help, and lifeguards quickly came and picked up the people who were pretty far out there at that point.
I've looked over the last 2 years, and we have gone out 20 times, both in this year, 17, and 2016. Not all of them were for the island, but most of them, at least 3/4, are usually for the island.
Technically, the sandbar is in a no-swim zone, and so is the area around. It's actually a tombolo, not a sandbar also. So that Deep does not even have lifeguards that would patrol that area. We didn't have lifeguards last year, and it was a cost of $40,000, and the state of Connecticut admitted that they were unable to staff the park properly. The city of Milford Ben Blake, our mayor, offered to actually train the lifeguards and provide additional lifeguards down at Silver Sands.
Last summer, we had a big conference with the state of Connecticut's Department of Environmental Protection to make sure that they were doing everything that we could do. I especially wanted to see more lifeguards on the state beach, Silver Sands State Park, because there were drownings this year when there were no lifeguards on duty, and that's just not acceptable on beautiful summer beach days when it's 85 degrees. It doesn't cost a lot to fully staff Silver Sands State Park. We've asked the state to do it. It's about $40,000 for the entire summer to have that beach fully staffed by lifeguards. We've asked many times to make sure that is the case. It's a small investment in terms of the public safety.
So the question remains, should the Tombolo remain open or should it be closed to the public?
Sandbar should absolutely stay open. I think people should be more careful, more vigilant while walking out the sandbar to Charles Island.
It's always going to be open. That sandbar has been there since Milford was run by Indians.
I think it should be accessible. It's all right, but you have to be very, very careful. I've been out there several times, but I've always looked at the tide tables and...
Well, trying to close our sandbar, or the Tombolo, would be almost an impossible feat. I mean, we would have to put up a chain link fence, but we'd have to fence off the whole beach because people could go around it. So it's really not a practical solution. Most practical solution is people need to pay attention.
It is an island that a lot of people go out to just because of its beauty, because it is so close, and there's something cool with that Tombolo, that naturally occurring sandbar that disappears twice a day and then reappears another 2 times a day. So it is something that I would hope continues to remain open. It is something that I enjoyed when I was a kid, and I know that my kids enjoy it too. So I want it to be open, but at the same time we need to take precautions because it is so dangerous.
Should the Tombolo remain open or should it be closed to the public?